Welcome back to Learn, Share, Repeat with me, Peter Rising. It's good to see you again. Today's video is all about SC-400, the Information Protection Administrator Associate Exam Guide Series. In this installment, we're going to be talking all about sensitivity labels within Microsoft Purview. Why are they important? What can you do with them? How can you implement and manage them? It's coming right up. So let's check our study guide for SC-400. We are still in the Implement Information Protection section, and we're moving into Implement and Manage Sensitivity Labels. We need to start by implementing roles and permissions for administering sensitivity labels. Then we will define and create those labels, configure and manage the policies associated with the labels, look at auto-labeling, monitor data classification and label usage using Content Explorer, Activity Explorer, and Audit Search. Apply bulk classification to on-premises data by using the Purview Information Protection Scanner, and manage protection settings and marking for applied sensitivity labels. So let's get started by looking at implementing the roles and permissions required for administering the sensitivity labels. So what's this all about? Let's take a look at the Learn documentation here, and it's telling us all about the permissions required to create and manage sensitivity labels. So members of your compliance team who will create those labels need appropriate permissions to the Microsoft Purview Compliance Portal. Now, by default, global admins for your tenant have access to this admin center and can give compliance officers and other people access without giving them all of the permissions of a tenant admin. For this limited admin access, we have the choice of using the following role groups. Here we are, we have them listed: information protection admins, analysts, investigators, and readers. You can get an explanation of each one by looking at the permissions and roles section of the Compliance Center. So let's do just that. We will go to our Compliance Center at compliance.microsoft.com, and we're in the permissions section and under roles and scopes. And here we are in the role groups for Microsoft Purview Solutions, and I have searched for information protection, and it's brought up exactly the role groups that we saw in the Learn document. Now, if we click on any of these in turn, we can get a bit more information about what is within them. So this first one, information protection, we can see the role group name, we can see the role group description. Well, it doesn't have one, but we can crucially see the roles that are within this role group. So this role group contains the ability to manage data classification content and data classification list viewer, data map reader. It has information protection admin rights, information protection analysts rights. So this pretty much has everything in here that you need. So you'll get a flavor of the mixture of settings that are within these roles. So this is really the top one. This is the one that has everything that is comprised of all these other roles. Now you can edit this particular group here, and you can choose the users and or groups who are to be selected for it, and users can perform tasks that match their role group permissions. And you can restrict role group permissions to apply to one or more admin units. So nice and simple, choose the users, choose the groups, and add them in to have access to this particular role group. There we go. So if I want to choose users here, I can do just that. I can pick Rachel Green. I can make Rachel Green a user of this role group. I can go next. I can see everything that's in place there. Then I can click on save, and job is done. You've successfully done so. Let's take a look at some of the other role groups that we've got to see how the permissions differ. We've got information protection investigators here. If we expand that one out, let's see what we've got. We can see that this one has a little less in terms of the roles within that particular role group. So there's a little bit less in there. So look at what your compliance admins need in relation to what they have to do for their jobs within the compliance portal. So go through these roles, see what they've got in there in terms of role groups, understand them. You can actually create your own role group as well, your own custom one. But for the most part, I would suggest that these roles here are going to do what you need them to do in order for what they are defined as. As you can see, as we go down the list, they're getting less and less in terms of what they can do. So you can be quite granular in terms of what you are giving to these particular analysts, investigators, or admins in terms of what they can see, what they can do. And you might just want to give them reader permission. So information protection readers, they can pretty much get access to most of what's in information protection features within Microsoft Purview portal, but they can't actually do anything more than read that content. They can't write, they can't make changes. So there you go. Now that we understand these permissions and roles, we can go ahead and create and assign sensitivity labels. And we do this from information protection in the compliance portal, and we go into labels. No need to really look at the overview. That's really just a summary screen. So we'll go straight into the labels, and we can see that we've already got some labels defined in here already. We've got general, we've got personal, we've got confidential, we've got public. So these are the names of our labels that we have defined. And next in our series of columns, we have the priority. And labels work in order of 0 to highest. So 0 being the lowest and the numbers increase. And this is in terms of how they are processed. So label order matters. And an example of what that means would be if we have a more restrictive label like confidential. Now, confidential is certainly going to be more restrictive than personal, more restrictive than general. It certainly will be more restrictive than public. So that's an error. We need to change that. And an example of where that might apply is if a user wants to change a label and they are lowering it from a higher level of protectiveness or encryption to one that has less restrictions, then we might want to put in a justification process for that to lower it. But we need to have this order correct. We need this to be the case that changing from confidential to public, as an example, means that it's going down rather than up. So that needs to be corrected. So if we highlight that, we have this option here to reprioritize that particular label. So we can move it up and it will update that priority. We'll get a little bit of a refresh. And there we go. We've now got confidential set as the highest level of label. That's what we want. So that's why label order matters. The scope of the label is what the label is going to be capable of applying to. We have all of our labels here applied to files that may be saved in OneDrive, SharePoint, or in Teams, to email in Exchange Online, to meetings. That's a relatively newer addition to the capabilities of labels in Microsoft Purview, to sites, so that means containers essentially. And when you think of sites or containers, think of the actual team or the actual SharePoint site rather than the item level. So there's a difference between item level and container level. And we've got unified groups as well that labels can be applied to. We can see who the label has been created by and when it was last modified. So with that understood, let's go ahead and create a label. So we've got general, we've got personal, we've got public, we've got confidential. Let's go in and create another label. Now you need to give it a friendly name. So what we could do is we could add one called highly confidential and make that even more restrictive than the current confidential label. We shall make the display name exactly the same as the name. Our label priority, now we're not getting a choice here. By default, this label will be assigned the highest priority, but you can change this after it's created. This serves our purposes very well in this instance because we want this, by definition of it being highly confidential, to be the highest priority. Always put in a good description so your users, when they highlight that label, will know what it is. So I'll just actually type good description here, and also put in a description for admins as well. So they're going to know what the label is as well. Fill these all in with good details. And you can even, if you want to, assign a label color. So, and apply that to your label. There we go. Right, let's go next. And now we need to define the scope for the label. And as we've already seen in the list of labels, labels can be applied directly to items such as files, to emails, and to meetings, and to containers like SharePoint sites and Teams, also to Fabric and Power BI items, schematized data assets, and more. So let us know where you want this label to be used so you can configure applicable protection settings. So you can learn more about label scopes. So take a look at all the learn.microsoft.com content. And you can choose what you want this label to apply to. So, items. Be aware that restricting the scope to only files or emails might impact access control settings where the label can be applied. So you can learn more about that as well. But we can choose to protect files created in Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and more. Emails, protect messages sent from all versions of Outlook. And meetings to protect calendar events and meetings scheduled within Outlook and Teams. Parent label will automatically inherit meeting scope from sublabels. Okay, so sublabels are another thing that you can create. You can create sublabels underneath a top-level label. In that instance, the top-level label will be not something you can actually apply. It will be like a folder, a container almost. Next, we have groups and sites. We can configure privacy, access control, and other settings to protect labeled teams, Microsoft 365 groups, and SharePoint sites. And we can use schematized data assets. This is still a preview feature. It's been in preview a very long time. And with this, you can apply labels to files and schematized data assets in the Purview data map. And such assets include SQL, Azure Synapse, Cosmos, AWS RDS, and more. I'm going to deselect that one because I have no means of demonstrating it, and the more commonly adapted label use cases are definitely these ones here. And I would tend to separate my groups and sites from my item policies, but for the purposes of demoing, I will leave it all as one. So when we go ahead and click on Next, we move into the Items section. And we have to choose the protection settings for the types of items that you have selected. And these protection settings that you configure are going to be enforced when the label is applied to items in Microsoft 365. So we have three sections here. We can control access to who can access and view the labeled items. That's going to relate to encryption. We can apply content marking via the use of headers, footers, and watermarks to the labeled items, and we can also protect Teams, meetings, and chats. We'll select all of these in this example, and we'll move on to the next section. And as you can see, the item section now expands out into these specific subsections. We've got a lot to do in here with access control, and we configure the encryption settings here for who can access the labeled items, and depending on the scope you specified, items can include emails, Office, Fabric, Power BI files, and meeting invites. So there's two things you can do here. You can either remove access control settings here if already applied, so a label can be used to remove those settings, or we can configure the access control settings, and this is what we want to do. Now I'm getting a warning information here about co-authoring settings. It's telling me to turn on co-authoring for Office desktop apps so multiple users can simultaneously edit labeled documents that have access control settings applied. So For the purposes of this demo, I won't do it, but you can learn more about this setting here, about what co-authoring means. And you can turn on co-authoring in the core settings of the Purview Compliance Center. So something to just be aware of. How do you want the permissions to be assigned is the next selection. The most common method is the default here, assign the permissions now. So we are going to push these permissions right here from the admin perspective. The other choice is to let users assign the permissions when they apply the label. Let them choose. And if you select that one, you get some other options that can be selected. So the labeling behavior for these settings varies depending on which operating system platform is used to apply the label. So learn more about that by clicking on the Learn More. And we can configure some Outlook settings here to enforce one of these following restrictions, which is do not forward or encrypt only. And if you hover over the information there, you get information on what that's going to do. So with do not forward, when users apply the label to an email in Outlook, recipients will be able to read the message but not forward, print, copy the content, and the sender has full permission to their message and all replies. Encrypt only, that one, if we select, when users apply the label to an email in Outlook, the email is encrypted and recipients must be authenticated. Recipients have no restrictions except that they can't remove the encryption. So that's one of the options. Or we can also choose to select for Word, PowerPoint, and Excel. We can prompt the users to specify permissions. So when applied, in Word, PowerPoint, or Excel files, a dialog box will appear asking them to choose one of the predefined permissions levels, specify the users or groups who the permissions apply to, and optionally set an expiry date for the labeled file. So in this example, we will leave it as assign permissions now. That is the most common use case for sensitivity labels because, and quite rightly in my opinion, a lot of admins and organizations don't trust their users to make that decision. So there you go. Anyway, next couple of settings, very important to consider. When does the user access to the content expire? A lot of people will skip over these two, but these are very important considerations. So imagine a scenario where, for example, somebody has access to content, but they leave the organization. They might have their OneDrive synced to their local computer, and they've got a local copy effectively on there. So if the access never expires and offline access is always allowed and never expires, then that's not going to be challenged. They could have access to that indefinitely. So with these settings, we can set access to content to expire on a specific date or a number of days after the label is applied. Allow offline access, the same principle. We can allow that always, never, or only for a number of days. Next, we need to assign the permissions. Who is going to have access to the content which is labeled when this label is applied? So we assign permissions to specific people, so only they can interact with the content that has this label applied. Pretty much what we just said. And if we go into assign permissions, we have some choices here. We can add all users and groups in your organization. We can add any authenticated users, which includes any user who has an email account that's authenticated by Microsoft Entra ID or a federated social provider. It includes any user who is authenticated by a Microsoft account, i.e. an Outlook.com account, or uses a one-time passcode for email only. That would be a good example of that. Would be a guest account. One-time passwords are quite often used in that scenario. You can add users or groups, specific users or groups. So if we clicked onto that one, we could search for specific users or groups rather than the add all users and groups in your organizations. Or you can add specific email addresses or domains. So you can add external domain names and email addresses for internal and external users and groups. So be sure to click add after entering the address or domain. So what we'll do here in this example, we'll just add all users and groups in your organization, and you can see that translates into the settings down here where the permissions is assigned. Next, you can choose the particular permissions that you want these people to have to the labeled content. By default, it selects co-author, which has the rights to view content, view rights, edit content, save, print, copy, and extract content, reply, reply all, forward, and allow macros. So if we choose the permissions, we can select the drop down here, and we can select different options here. We can select co-owner, which pretty much has everything, and we can be as restrictive or otherwise as we want. So there we go. In this example, I might want to do viewer, so we'll save that. Although this is a external confidential one, so that might not necessarily, well, it might. Depending on the scenario. There's so many different scenarios that you could consider. Let's click on save, and that gets us to the end of that access control setting. So there's a lot going on in that one pane here, and actually there's the option to use double key encryption as well, so you can turn this on if you want to use 2 keys to further control access to labeled items, and Microsoft stores 1 key in Azure and you hold the other key. Be aware that if you turn this on, you won't be able to edit this label after it's created. Very important consideration. Let's click next, and we come into the content marking options. This is nice and simple. You can toggle content marking on or off, and you can add a watermark, a header or a footer, and you can customize the text as you wish it to be. We'll not dwell on that too long, and we'll just turn that off for the purposes of this example. Next, Teams, meetings, and chats. We can control the settings here that apply to all Teams meetings that have this label applied. If you select the setting below, the options you configure will be enforced when the label is applied to a meeting. Users won't be able to change the setting in Teams. If you don't select a setting, users will be able to select it themselves when creating a team meeting. So we've got some options here for controlling who can bypass the lobby, who can present, who can record, control whether the meetings are recorded automatically, control end-to-end encryption, control watermarks, meeting chat, and prevent copying chat to the clipboard. So you can select all those if you need to, and as you select them, you get choices from the drop down there. So lots of cool options there for meetings and chats. Next, we have auto labeling for files and emails. So when users edit Office files or compose, reply to, or forward emails from Outlook that contain content matching the conditions you choose here, we're going to automatically apply the label or recommend they apply it themselves. So auto labeling, toggle it on, and we get options here to add conditions. We've got a little warning bar here. It shows us that since encryption is turned on, a large amount of content might be automatically encrypted when this label is applied. So turning on encryption impacts Office files, Word, PowerPoint, Excel, and PDF files that have this label applied. And because the files will be encrypted for security reasons, performance will be slow when the files are opened or saved, and some SharePoint and OneDrive features will be limited or unavailable. So we can detect content that matches these conditions, and we can add the conditions the content contains. We can name a group here if we wish to, and then we can do this based on sensitive info types or trainable classifiers, which are principles that we've already dealt with in this course. So we can select the ones we want and add them in. Nice and simple. And similar sort of settings below here to what we've had in earlier sections. When the content matches these conditions, what do we want to do? Well, we can automatically apply that label, or we can recommend that the users apply that said label. And we can display this message to users when the label is applied. We can enter the specific text we want here, or leave it blank to display the default message. So I'll turn off auto labeling because I just wanted to demo that. I don't particularly want to configure it, but hopefully you get the picture of what that means, how it works. Okay, so that's the items level completed. We'll now move on to groups and sites, and here we have 3 options to configure. These settings will apply, just as a reminder, to teams, groups, and sites that have the label applied. So this is container level labeling at work here. They don't apply directly to the files stored in those containers. So we can choose privacy and external user access to control the level of access that the internal and external users will have to labeled Teams and Microsoft 365 groups. We can select external sharing and conditional access and Teams discoverability settings. Just want to sort of show you something here. If I just select that one item, you'll see that the next section expands out with just that one item in there. So if I go back and I select all three, then we get those three to be configured. So first we've got privacy and external user access. Control the level of access here, so these options will be applied to the groups and teams that have the label applied. And public, so is the first one. Anyone in your organization can access the group or team, including content, and add members. Do we want the privacy setting to be set to private? Only team owners and members can access this group or team, or none? Team and group members can access and set the privacy settings themselves. And then external user access. We can let Microsoft 365 group owners and add people outside of your organization to the group as guests. So we can select that as well if we want to. We'll leave that one as public and check the external user access there. We'll go next. And here we define external sharing and conditional access settings. We can control who can share SharePoint content with people outside your organization and decide whether users can access labeled sites from unmanaged devices. So this first checkbox here, control external sharing from labeled SharePoint sites. When this label is applied to a SharePoint site, these settings will replace existing external sharing settings configured for the site. So content can be shared with anyone, new and existing guests, or only people in your organization. So that's an important distinction to be aware of, that these settings here will replace any existing external settings you've defined in your SharePoint Admin Center. Then we've got use Microsoft Entra conditional access is the second one to protect labeled SharePoint sites. And here we can either control the level of access users have from unmanaged devices, or select an existing authentication context to enforce restrictions. So we can determine whether users can access SharePoint sites from unmanaged devices, which are devices that aren't Microsoft Entra hybrid joined and or enrolled in Intune. So for this setting to work, you must also configure the SharePoint feature that blocks or limits access to SharePoint files from unmanaged devices. And we've got these options here to allow full access, limited web-only access, or block access. Or we can choose that existing authentication context, which ties into conditional access. The authentication context, not really relevant to explain in this course, but I do have other videos that talk about authentication context, and I will make sure to remember to put a card at the top right of this video at this exact moment to link you to that, so you can learn more about authentication context. I'm not going to configure either of those at this moment. We'll go next. Define Teams discoverability settings. So configure the private team discoverability settings for teams that have this label applied. Private team discoverability already checked. Allow users to discover private teams that have this label applied. When selected, any user assigned to a Teams policy that has private Teams discovery turned on can search for and discover private teams that have the label applied. Interesting distinction. So a nice little way of tweaking that setting, if you like. I quite like that one. Okay, so thus ends the groups and sites section. Next, schematized data assets. This is a preview feature, and hence I'm not going to go into it really at all, but you could configure that from here. If you want to learn more about auto labeling for schematized data assets, you can click on the links here for learn.microsoft.com. I don't know if this will appear in the exam. It's been a long time since I did this exam, actually. And in my last renewal, I don't recall there being any content about this. I think it would be quite unfair to include content on preview features, but I'm not 100% certain. But I think it's unlikely. Let's go next, and we can review our settings for the label, and we can make any last-minute changes right from here. And if we're happy, we can go ahead and create the label. And it should take just a few seconds for our new label to be created. And there we go. Label is created. We can actually, from here, go right to the step of publishing the label to users' apps, or don't create a policy yet. No, I don't want to do it yet. I want to do it on my own time, under my own control. So, and you can review some recommended resources and prerequisites and further content here at this stage. So take a look at that. It's always very useful if you're just new to this. but then click on done, and we will have a label. There you go, one highly confidential label ready to go. So let's just at this point recap where we are. We have looked at implementing roles and permissions. We've looked at defining, creating sensitivity labels. We need to look at configuring and managing sensitivity label policies next. So let's do just that, and we'll go through these remaining sections as well. So back to the portal, and we're still in labels. We have our new label there. Let's now move into label policies. Now you can see here that I have a default labels policy in place already. I could just edit that one and add the label to that particular policy, or I could publish a new policy and add it that way. I'll show you how to do both. So we'll quickly do this publish label. So here we choose the sensitivity labels that we want to publish. So we click on the very small selection here to do so, and we could select whichever ones we want, but in this example we could select just a couple just to show you that you don't have to select them all. And we can go through. What we can do at this point as well is we can choose to assign admin units that we'd like to assign the policy to, and admin units are something that are created in Entra ID and will restrict the policy to a specific set of users and groups, and your selections will affect the location options available to you in the next step. So not a mandatory step. If you're not using admin units, then you don't have to do this, but you can add or remove any that you've got configured here. I believe I have a video on admin units somewhere previously. If I do, I'll try and link to that here. So let's go next. Who do we want to publish the policy to? Do we want to do it to all users and groups? We can do, or we can edit that to do a specific set of users and or groups. We'll leave it as this one for now. And here are the policy settings. So there are 4 main policy settings that we can check here. We can choose to have this one for users must provide a justification to remove a label or lower its classification. That's what we talked about earlier when I mentioned about the label order and why that is important. So if you check that one, you can put that in place. You can require the users to apply a label to their emails and documents. So if they want to save documents or send emails, then they're going to be required to set a label for that content before they can do so. So you can check that one as well. You can require users to apply a label to their Fabric and Power BI content as well. I'll not leave that one checked because I'm not going to get into the realms of Fabric and Power BI content. And you can provide users with a custom help page link as well. And you can enter that URL there just to give some guidance for helping users to understand how to use labels in your organization. So we'll leave these couple here applied. And then in the next step, we can see this menu expands out and we can make some of the choices based on the selections we've made. Here we can choose to set a default label for documents. So we can set that as one of the 2 labels that we've selected for this policy. So we'll put general. We can then go to the next setting, which is emails. So here we can have that the same as the document label, or we can change it. We can put none, general, or highly confidential, so we don't have to have them the same. We can also inherit labels from attachments. So if a label is applied to an email, then an attachment with a higher priority label, if when added to an email, this setting replaces the existing label with the label from the attachment. Significantly as well, or subsequently as well, I should say, if multiple labeled attachments are added, again, the highest priority label will be applied. If the email isn't already labeled, it will inherit the highest priority label from any attachment. So lots of good principle of highest protection being applied there. And you can put a checkbox there to ensure that the email inherits the highest priority label from attachments. We can also have this section here for recommending that users apply the attachments label instead of automatically applying it. So we give a level of choice there to our users as well. So we can do that. Next, we're into the meetings settings. So again, we can choose the default label for meetings, general, highly confidential, or none. So I'll select none in this case. Same for sites and groups. So we could put general for that. Require users to apply a label to their groups or sites. Fabric and Power BI. I'm just not going to put anything in there. Then we give our policy a name. We can give it a name, give it a description, click next, click finish, and it will create that policy. So, and obviously you can have multiple labeled policies applying to different sets of users and groups. I'll not complete that because I've already got one here for this particular tenant, which is doing just fine at the moment for what I want this tenant to do. This is a default labels policy. So if I click onto that, I can go in and see exactly what it's doing. I can edit the policy and it will take me through that same sort of wizard. So it's sensitivity labels to publish. So what we could do, we could actually edit this one and we could add in the highly confidential one and add that to the policy. Go next. Admin units, no, we're not going to do that. All users and groups. Settings to provide a justification. We can skip over that one. That other setting that was selected in the previous one, and we can go through all this again and choose what we want, but I'm happy with this. I just wanted to add in that additional label to this particular label policy. I can submit that and job is done. Nice and simple. There we go, policy updated, click done. Next, let's talk about auto labeling. That is the final item in the information protection menu here. So we can create an auto labeling policy, which works in a similar but slightly different fashion to when you create the labels. You can do auto labeling from that wizard as well. So creating auto labeling policies to automatically apply sensitivity labels to email messages or OneDrive and SharePoint files that contain sensitive info. To confirm that labels will be applied to the correct items, you'll first run policies in a simulation mode so that you can review items that will be labeled when the policy is activated. So in addition to these policies, you can automatically apply labels to Office client apps by editing the auto labeling settings for a specific label. So that's the distinction. It's calling out there what we did earlier when we're applying labels to Office client apps. In that setting up that specific label in that step, we have some different controls there that relate to Office client apps. So this one, if we create an auto labeling policy, you will see the sort of very familiar sort of look and feel that you'll see in things like DLP. You'll see these built-in sensitive information types. So you can choose the info that you want this label applied to. So you could select countries or regions. So you could select the US, for example. You could select medical and health, and then get the particular regulations that you want to work from. And we can go next. So we've selected US Health Insurance Act, the HIPAA enhanced. We can put in a name for your auto labeling policy, a description, assign admin units again if you wish to, locations you want to apply to, Exchange email, SharePoint sites, OneDrive accounts, and you can edit this to be more specific and more granular than just all users and groups or all sites and all users and groups, but we'll leave that as it is for now. So we'll go next. We can set up common or advanced rules, so we can define one set of common rules for all locations. If you want to have more control over what these are set to, you can go for the advanced rules and define those. And if you go next, it's going to allow you to add new rules or edit the suggested one that it's putting in place here. And you can get very granular here and select the conditions and the sensitive info types and various other things, and you can tweak this as you want. We've got trainable classifiers in here as well. You can put in exceptions and tailor that to your specific needs. So we'll leave that as it is for Exchange rules. Then we can go through and do the same for SharePoint sites, for OneDrive accounts, so we can be different in terms of the locations, which is really good. Then what label are we going to apply with this auto labeling? So we can choose a label we want to apply in this particular situation. So we might put confidential, for example, in this instance. We can add that in, and it's telling us here, just that reminder again, that since encryption is turned on, a large amount of content might be automatically encrypted when this label is applied. So it's telling us to expect that. We can go into the next settings here, which apply only to email messages, and automatically replace existing labels that have the same or lower priority. So if this one is selected, the label will replace any existing labels if their priority is the same or lower than this one, regardless of whether the existing label was applied automatically or manually. There's also an option here to apply encryption to email received from outside your organization, which you can select as well. So the label you selected has encryption settings. When it's applied to messages received from outside your organization, encryption is going to be applied when you designate a rights management owner from your organization. This ensures that someone has permissions to remove the encryption if needed. So very important step. Designate that rights management owner. And we can search for a user. I'll put in myself here and select that option. There we go. We can go next. Then we have two choices. Decide if you want to test out the policy now or later. So to help you determine whether the label will be applied to the correct items, you're going to need to run this simulation mode before turning it on. So you can do it right away, or you can do it later. And in simulation mode, it's going to gather items that match the policy, but the labels won't be applied yet. So it's highly recommended that you review these items to decide whether the policy needs to be refined or whether it's ready to be turned on. And this can take some time. So we can automatically turn on the policy if not modified after 7 days in simulation. The 7-day period will restart each time the policy is modified whilst in simulation, or you can leave the policy turned off at this time. So I'll do that right now because I don't want to run a simulation just at the moment, but that hopefully gives you an idea of how the auto labeling policy works and what simulation mode is and what the difference is between auto labeling here and within the labels themselves. I've got an error here, which is interesting. The label confidential encryption is configured to expire. So encryption with expiration may not be used in auto sensitivity label policy for SharePoint. That's interesting. So that's a good warning. And I didn't know that, I have to admit. So a very good thing to take note of, that when it comes to SharePoint, that is something to watch out for. So that's fine. It's not going to let us proceed with that. So there we go. So I will in fact just cancel that wizard, and I've demonstrated that effectively now, hopefully, so you understand it. But it's giving you lots of good prompts and guides along the way. So next we can take a look at how we can monitor for labeling activity using things like Content Explorer, Activity Explorer, and even the Audit search features. So if we scroll up to data classification, we've got Content Explorer, we've got Activity Explorer. In here, in Content Explorer, we can get a look at sensitive info types that are matching our sensitivity labels and our trainable classifiers, so we can see the general label where that's been applied and any matching content to the general label. We can see we have an Exchange item that matches it. So Content Explorer is a really good way of getting a quick look at where you have matches to that labeled content. Activity Explorer will enable you to see when users have applied a label, removed a label, lowered a label to a lesser a less restrictive permissions, shall we say, and if it requires a justification, that justification will be recorded as well, so you'll be able to see all of that in here. And I wonder if I can go back a little bit earlier than this and see if anything is in there, but I can only go back a certain way, and I don't think it's going to. Oh, actually, yes, we do have some content in here. So what have we got? So hopefully we can see something relevant here. So this gives you a flavor of things that have been going on. So here we go, label applied. So we can filter this by label activity. So the label has been applied there, label applied, and it's got other stuff in there like DLP rules matched and so on and so forth. So you get the idea. And the other way you can check into this is via auditing. So we can look at the audit solution and we can look through the activities and search for label. So here we can see applied sensitivity label to an email, matched auto labeling policy rule, generated auto labeling simulation feedback, simulation statistics, lots of good stuff there. So let's see if we've got any matches there. Applied sensitivity label to an email, and let's just put in a date range. I don't know if I've done this in recent times, but we can have a look and search. But if the content is there, you will find it. And oh, here we go. There we go. January the 1st to March the 19th. MIP label. So what is this telling me? So job status is queued. It's not. Oh, that's a search. So so yeah, just be familiar with the abilities of Content Explorer, Activity Explorer, and Audit in order to keep track of labeling activity. Very powerful tools at your disposal. So back to the study guide, and something you do need to know about as well as the Microsoft Purview Information Protection Scanner, which enables you to apply bulk classification to on-premises data, that data being in file shares or within SharePoint on premises. And I must admit, I've not come across this being used massively in customers that I've dealt with. I can see that this would be extremely valuable in cases where data is on premises still and it needs to be prepared for migration into the cloud, and getting that identification of its classification prior to that would be very useful, I think. So this, if memory serves, you can configure from the core settings of Microsoft Purview, and there indeed it is, Information Protection Scanner. So not something that's particularly easy to demo, but what you can do is you can look at the learn more about the scanner, and you can use it by configuring clusters and nodes and running content scan jobs. If you have an environment configured, which at present I don't have a VM or something I can go on and simulate scanning on premises data, but I have used this before, and it can be a little fiddly. It can take a little bit of tweaking to get right, but it's definitely something that you need to know about. But from memory, I don't think it comes up too much, if at all, in the exam, but I'd be prepared for it. I would take the time to read through this documentation, to learn about it, the overview, understand this diagram, how it all comes together. So it shows you here the scanner architecture, where the scanner discovers files across your on-premises and SharePoint servers, and the process here of running the scanner in discovery mode only to create reports that check to see what happens when your files are labeled, so you can get a view on what will happen before you actually do it. So lots of options there, and it takes you through the whole scanning process here to determine whether files are included or excluded for scanning, inspection and labeling techniques, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of good documentation about this. It takes you through files not labeled by the scanner and what happens there, and some next steps as well, including things like scanner deployment prerequisites. So check that out. I wouldn't spend a massive amount of time on it if you don't have the ability to test it, to spin up an environment. I probably wouldn't worry too much. Just be aware of what it can do and familiarize yourself with this article, and you should be in good shape. But there we go. Nothing in my particular one here, but you can add scan jobs in, give it a name, a description, select a cluster and a schedule, info types to be discovered, and treat recommended labeling as automatic, enable DLP policy rules. So just have a good look through this and make sure you're familiar with what can and can't be done with it, because it is a hard thing to test if you're not actually deploying it. And then finally, for this video in the study guide, we have this manage protection settings and marking for applied sensitivity labels. Now, I must admit, I'm not quite sure what this means. I'm struggling a bit with that particular item within the guide. Manage protection settings. I wonder if that refers to editing existing labels. I'm really not sure. And marking. I mean, that would pertain to content marking, I would suspect. So I'm really not sure. But there is plenty of documentation for sensitivity labels. So in addition to everything I've shown you here in the portal, in the demos, do make sure that you go to getting started with sensitivity labels, so you understand that, learn about sensitivity labels, just go through all of these items here alongside what I've shown you in the demo, and try it yourself if you can. And if you do, you'll be well prepared to take the SC-400 test as it relates and pertains to sensitivity labels. And there you go. I think you'll agree that sensitivity labels are a crucial part of the Microsoft Purview story in information protection. So much you can do with this technology, so much so that the video is almost 1 hour in length, which surprised me, I have to admit. But I hope you found it useful. I hope it's going to give you some things to think about to prepare for your SC-400 study path. Let me know how you're getting on with that, if you've taken the exam, if you need to resit it, where you are in your certification journey, and let me know how I can help. Always happy to hear your stories. Okay, we'll wind up the video there. Watch out for more content coming real soon. Please give me a like if you've enjoyed the video. That helps so much for me to grow the channel. And if you do enjoy all of my content and want to see more, please consider subscribing and hitting that notifications bell. Okay, you all take care. See you very soon. Bye-bye.